about to bring over our first guest today. It is Joshua Crawford. He is a contributor for Young Voices, and I am so glad to have him here on the show. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Not quite as energetic as you are, but I will try to match that energy as best I can.
Well, as you can tell, it was a late night last night. I'm revved up on coffee, and I can tell you it was a jam-packed, amazing event. 1,100 Americans, patriotic Americans, coming together who believe in this country, who love this country, and want the best for it. And, you know, hearing from Zeb Gorka, hearing from Chris DeGaulle, hearing from Dennis Prager and Mike Gallagher, they're all coming from all different walks of life. And they are all, you know, imparting wisdom to us as conservatives who want to take back our country, who want to take even the battleground state of Pennsylvania. And I'm from North Carolina, and we are seeing so many different races really hit, especially as we are 18 days out and early voting starts in North Carolina today. But Josh Crawford, I am so glad to have you. I've been reading your work. You are an amazing commentator and contributor to Young Voices. And first and foremost, excuse me, I wanted to talk about what the article you did in Chicago Sun-Times news article about the violent crimes in businesses and what is happening to our businesses because of the violent crimes and the increase in crimes in our cities. Can you break that down for us this morning?
Sure. So there have been a couple of high-profile announcements over the last several months from large national corporations, multinational corporations, and their response to increased violence in cities. Starbucks is pulling out locations from cities all over the country. Walgreens closed a number of Bay Area locations, and in both of those instances, they cited the safety of their employees, crime as reasons for doing it. And most recently, the CEO of McDonald's, which is headquartered in Chicago, was speaking to the Economic Club of Chicago and basically said, like, look, we're committed to staying here. We care about the city of Chicago, but you got to meet us halfway. The crime is killing us. It's hurting us from a corporate recruitment standpoint, and it's hurting us from a retail location standpoint. We are sort of ground zero when it comes to opioid overdoses, violent crime, smash and grab robberies, those kinds of things. And all of that is really important. But who this hurts the most is the most vulnerable citizens of these communities to begin with. People tend to think that the poverty violence relationship is directional from poverty to violence, right? That communities with high rates of poverty, the poverty leads to violence. There's actually not a ton of support for that thesis. What there is support for is the reverse. When violent crime goes up, businesses leave, businesses don't expand, your poor residents get poorer, and your poor residents are less economically mobile than they otherwise would.
Last night I was listening on the drive back from Bucks County. It was a good hour and a half back to where my parents live in Chester County, and I was listening to Stacy on the right, Sirius XM Patriot Channel, and I love listening to her commentary. She had a caller call in from Malibu, California, and that caller was riled up, probably more so than I am this morning, but she was riled up, and she said people are leaving in masses, but she stated 65,000 homeless in Malibu.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually just did Stacy's show on Tuesday night about this topic, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I mean the homelessness is a huge problem as it relates to this. This has been a huge problem coming out of COVID, right? A number of cities did things to try to mitigate the harm of homelessness during COVID lockdowns, right? And a lot of this stuff is well intentioned. It's not as if it's some malevolent actor out there who seeks to purposefully make things worse. But the problem with liberalism, especially liberalism in practice, is there's a wonderful Thomas Sowell quote that the problem with folks on the left is that the beauty that they envision in their ideas blinds them from the awful things that it actually creates. And that's true with urban squalor and homelessness. It's true with this urban violence. There have been a lot of really well-intended policies that have made things far worse for the most vulnerable in American cities.
Well, let me ask you this. My parents are 45 minutes outside of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is full of drugs, full of violence. You know, they defunding the police, progressive Democrat thought. You have Fetterman who hasn't really worked a day in his life running for Senate. And my father and I talked about this last night. How in the world did he even become lieutenant governor? How did he slip in there and just all of a sudden show up? But he hasn't done anything. He doesn't have a record. His record is living with his parents, similar to our president living in his basement. And I can say it whether you want to or not. I can say it until I get censored on, YouTube. I'm streaming at all these, social locations, and I'm sure I'll have a couple jabs here and there of, disconnect. But what do we say to that? And the reason why I'm stating those facts is because I'm headed into the fatherhood piece that you wrote back in June. It is still relevant. It is still relevant to, even as we are in October heading into the holiday season, where there is a huge lack of fathers in this nation. Now, let me ask you this, Joe. Do you see it more in the cities? Do you see it because of what's happening in our cities? Is it more prevalent to see that in the cities? Talk to me about how you're getting to those numbers. And is it Black versus white? Is it in the Hispanic communities? Where are we seeing it most?
Yeah, so you really see it in two pockets. One is sort of urban, African American, poor, underclass communities. The other place that you see it, which oftentimes, frankly, doesn't get the attention that first category does, is rural, poor, white underclass communities. Charles Murray wrote a book a number of years ago called Coming Apart that was sort of this update on how white America is doing. And white America has largely fractured into two life courses. You have sort of a middle and upper middle class life course that is fundamentally and foundationally different from the lower class life course by virtually every metric: education, economic mobility, intact families, intact marriages, all those kinds of questions. The same thing is true in urban Black communities. Latino communities are kind of somewhere in the middle between all of this. But the two pockets that really have a lot of similarity in terms of problem are poor rural whites and poor urban Blacks. And from a electoral standpoint, from an ideology standpoint, those are often thought of as sort of diametrically opposed groups, right? But the problems that they face are very similar, and the solutions for those folks are very similar. You're seeing this in Chicago right now. Wall Street Journal piece a number of days ago that talked about these Chicago voters in these neighborhoods that have experienced these higher rates of crime that have sort of become disillusioned with the progressive narrative about crime. That what they see in their surroundings doesn't match what progressives are saying the problems and solutions are. Now, it also mentioned that those Chicago voters are not yet ready or comfortable to switch over and be full-throated Republicans. But what it's doing is it's keeping those folks on the sideline because they don't really feel represented in either conversation by either party in Chicago. And so I think you're seeing a lot of that go on right now, where folks, especially those that are dealing with the problems in the most acute way in the country, very disillusioned by the progressive narratives on things, but whether or not they're fully ready to switch over and start to vote for Republicans or self-identify as conservatives is an open question.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I'm hearing in, the underground, if you will, that independents are not going to really come out and say, but they're leaning more towards the R's than they are towards the D side because of everything going on at the federal that's trickling down. All politics is, like Zev Gorka said, all politics is local. And that's, I think, what we're really starting to see here. Let me ask you this, though, going back to the whole fatherhood piece and the crimes in the cities, are they connected?
Absolutely. So
okay.
I tell this to people all the time because there's this desire for, frankly, on both sides of the political aisle, this desire for sort of what is referred to as root cause, right? On the left, people want to point to structural racism or economic conditions or an inequality as the real reason people commit crime. On the right, folks often point to fatherlessness or reductions in religiosity, or reductions in religious attendance as the root cause of crime. And the truth is that all of those things matter, but the only root cause of crime is criminal actors. The overwhelming majority of people who fall into one or more of those subcategories that I just mentioned will never commit a crime, and certainly never commit a serious or violent crime, right? Like
Mhm.
most people who grow up in single parent homes, in poverty,
Mhm.
from historically marginalized population in a currently socially isolated part of the country will never pick up a gun and shoot somebody. It is individuals who make those decisions, not sort of societal conditions. But
Right.
as far as things that contribute to uh, crime, fatherlessness is one
Mhm.
of the best predictors, or one of the strongest contributors, if you will. And what we're increasingly seeing in our most vulnerable population, those two I talked about, urban blacks, rural whites, in the sort of bottom quartile of the socioeconomic status, those populations are increasingly seeing fatherless homes. And
Mhm.
there's a lot
Mhm.
of downsides to that, some of them economic from an earnings standpoint, but especially for young men to not have a father in the home that provides a meaningful role model that can sort of tell right from wrong. And when what is a workload that is designed to be divided between two people becomes entirely bore by one person,
Mhm.
try as they might. I mean, there are single mothers out here who are doing heroic work trying to raise
Yes.
kids and create a
Yes.
better environment for them. But it is
Yes.
remarkably difficult to do that as efficiently as two people did, and that's just math. Like two is greater than one,
Yes.
always. And so there's a lot of societal ills that stem from or are contributed to by a lack of fathers in homes.
Let me ask you, with that, where have we in the conservative faith-based space, where have we gone wrong to let, or do I even say let, for this to continually unfold and get worse? Where do we need to rise up to prevent this or be more active in the communities? Or what's that missing link there that we as conservative Christians, that's my huge audience here. We are conservative Christians in this audience. So where have we gone wrong? Is it
Yeah.
is it something that we need to be taking on?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think that Christian conservatives are the epicenter of where this needs to be stemming from for a couple of reasons. One, you need to hold the members of your congregation accountable in a loving
Hmm.
way as
Hmm.
a starting point, right? Like before you talk about government policy, before you talk about any of that, we have frankly done a pretty bad job in the churches of
Hmm.
holding our own accountable and helping those who need help, right? Like it's certainly not all stick. It's
Hmm.
about being involved in the lives of people that we go to church with, not just seeing them on Sunday mornings or a Wednesday evening Bible class, but actually being involved in their lives, walking with them through their struggles, helping them along, all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. So that's the first thing out the gate,
Hmm.
that Christians have a unique and individual responsibility here, greater than any sort of policy or government question. The place where I think we have fallen short on this is not thinking about family policy more comprehensively, right?
Hmm.
On the right, we have sort of focused on a couple of sub issues as it relates to family policy. One of the major sort of victories, if you will, is that teen pregnancies have declined considerably over the last several
Hmm.
decades. That's a very positive thing. But out of wedlock pregnancies have increased. And so what we've done is we've delayed the time at which individuals get pregnant, but they're still getting pregnant,
Right.
outside of the context of a marriage. And so that was sort
Right.
of like a little win that didn't produce the result that we want. And so we need to think about family policy more comprehensively. We need to think about fatherlessness as sort of a standalone social issue. And for those of us on the right who deeply believe in limited government, deeply believe in the free market, need to be comfortable with the government getting involved in not necessarily incentivizing fatherhood, but encouraging active and
Hmm.
engaged fathers in
Hmm.
their children's life, right? Like
Hmm.
that is a relatively big government proposition, right? To say that the government ought to get involved in promoting fathers
Right.
being involved with their family. It's an unfortunate sentence to have to say, but we have 60 years of policy at this point in the opposite direction. And so we have to sort of correct that way. And so there was
Hmm.
an analysis done of these programs in Ohio that are designed to encourage participation from fathers who are not themselves in the home, but to
Hmm.
get them involved in their kids' lives. And even if a father is not in the home, having them an active and involved member of their child's life can make a
Hmm.
huge difference. And
Yeah.
so, if you were never married, if you've gotten divorced, still being a meaningful participant in your child's life goes a long way. It's not
Hmm.
ideal. It's not as good, frankly, as having that involved father in the home as a part of a married couple. But there's a lot of benefit to it, and so those kinds of programs ought to be implemented and tested around the country to see if they're replicable and if there are other ways that we can try to get fathers meaningfully involved in their child's lives.
Yes, most definitely. I want to switch for a hot second as we are 18 days out to midterm elections. And are you? Am I correct that you are in the great state of Kentucky? Is that where you're
That's
based out of?
correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so, as we're looking around the nation to see last night they said it looks like the Senate could go red. It looks like we could take back Congress. And, you hear it here this morning. And they were talking about it last night. You heard it from all of them on the stage. That looks like it's headed in that direction. From your viewpoint, and as you are working on these articles and as you're working in your field, what are your thoughts in regards to midterms? You know, feel free and predict. I mean, I'm not going to hold you to it, but what are your thoughts as Americans are still looking to make sure that they have food on the table, gas in their tank, getting to work, having a job, all of these economic things that are really hitting the American family pretty hard? What are your thoughts? Do you think it is going to turn the tide to be more of a quote red wave in 18 days? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I think it the Senate is probably a toss up. I think the House is probably going to swing Republican. If you look at the polling data,
Mm-hmm.
the majority of issues that voters are caring the most about right now are inflation, are the
Yep.
economy broadly, are
Yep.
crime, are
Yep.
education. So those are
Yeah.
sort of the big four right now. Of those four, Republicans hold commanding leads in sort of preference party or which party you think will handle that issue better on inflation, the economy, and crime.
Mm-hmm.
Education is sort of within the margin of error typically.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit plus D, but not substantially. And so that being the case, that would suggest that Republicans are going to benefit from those being the issues that Americans care about and being the more trusted party on those
Mm-hmm.
issues. Now, of course, when you're talking about statewide races, candidate quality matters, local politics matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
That is a state that has both a governor's election and a Senate election. Georgia's the same way, has a governor's
Yep.
election and a Senate election.
Yep.
The opposite things seem to be true in Georgia and Pennsylvania right now. Brian
Mm-hmm.
Kemp, very popular, probably going
Yes.
to win by a substantial margin. That may
Yes.
sort of carry Herschel Walker along in that Senate race
Yes.
because people tend to not ballot split at the top of the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania's the other way. Josh Shapiro seems to be very popular in Pennsylvania, probably going to win that governor's race. Do people cross
Mm-hmm.
over and vote for Dr. Oz? You don't typically see it, but given some of the negative attitudes towards Fetterman, you may see it in Pennsylvania. It's unclear.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans have a real shot in Nevada, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
one of those that Republicans have circled for a long time and thought that they could compete in, and it seems like they really are going to
Yeah.
this time around. And so the Senate is unclear. What is clear to me, especially as it relates to violent crime, though, is that Democrats will continue to control most of American cities, right? Especially when
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about top 50 metros.
Yeah.
The question is whether or not those Democrats are going to choose to govern from a place of reality or govern from a place of ideology. You
Right.
saw the mayor of Memphis, Tennessee, who is a Democrat, a number of weeks ago after a couple of high profile incidents, come out and say, look, we need to approach this differently than we have been. We need to get serious about putting violent and serious offenders in prison. We need
Mm-hmm.
law doing those kinds of things. That kind of Democrat is workable in American city.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at some of these progressive prosecutors, you look at some of the
Right.
sort of very progressive politicians in other jurisdictions, and their ideology is just so far removed from the reality that their
Mm-hmm.
citizens that things are not likely to get better in those places.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, we are just about up on the break. Where can we find you? What do you have coming out in the next couple of weeks? Are you working on any specific articles that we can be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm with the Georgia Center for Opportunity, so foropportunity.org. You'll see all my stuff there. I don't have the stomach for Twitter, and so if your listeners want to interact with me on Instagram, it's
Great.
J Crawford 502. That's sort of the only social media I really use, but I post all my stuff there and interact with folks there. Yeah, I've got a piece coming out on sort of the role that redemption can play in individuals re-entering society once they've been incarcerated, getting a job, meaningful employment, all that kind of stuff. That should be out in the short term. And I will likely have a piece on the role that crime has played in the midterm elections once that is over.
Well, Josh, I'd love to have you back to talk about both of those. Those sound phenomenal. And as I am going to be doing a lot of features leading into midterms and then post, I would love to have you come back and speak to those. That would be great. And I'm grateful to Young Voices always giving me amazing contributors and commentators like yourself. So thank you so much for being here this morning. I really am grateful.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a wonderful day. Many blessings to you. We'll see you soon.
You as well.